There is a renaissance of young people. I love that word, renaissance, don't you? I love it. There's a renaissance of young people who are creative self-starters and lifelong learners coming out of the homeschool movement. Well, I'm excited to have you brave ones here today. That's what you are, in my opinion, because we're going to be talking about those of us who are taking a non-traditional path, as we have done with our schooling all along. So why are we surprised, right? So let's jump into this. One thing I want to mention is, as Jay and I were setting up, a couple of times my internet was glitching, and I apologize. So if I glitch or go away for a second, hang in there. Hopefully we'll press through. So today we're going to be talking about a variety of paths after high school. We're not going to focus on the college path. That's a great option, but we're going to be talking about all of those others. And so I'm going to refer to this as the variety pack. So when you hear me talking about that, you'll know what I mean. We have been working with our kids, some of us through our whole high school, through their whole educational process. Others, maybe you joined into homeschooling, went back and forth from school to public school to private school to homeschool, but you've been there all along. And so we're really at one of those moments with our kids where it's going to be a time of change. Things are starting to, in a happy way and in a sad way, come to an end and a new beginning. So it's a time of change. Change can be scary. We all know that. Change can be daunting. Can be scary for you and daunting for you, but also for your student, for your child that's in that spot. They may be heading towards the end of high school, or they may be standing right here in their senior year, very much at the end of high school. And so one of the first things I want to point us to is God's word. In times when it is scary or change is there, that's the best place we can turn. So I'm going to share a verse of scripture with you. I'm not sure if my screen is sharing. I'm doing things different today than I typically do, but hopefully you're seeing that verse in front of you. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, I will help you, and I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. And so that's a great verse for us to hold on to. It's a great verse for us to share with our kids as they scoot towards adulthood. When we come to times in life of change, it's good to mark those times. And for those of us who have raised our kids and gone to any pediatrician visits, you might remember that they're often looking for milestones. They're looking for milestones of childhood, they often call them. You know, those milestones like, when did they first roll over? When did they first crawl, walk, talk? Well, graduation is another one of those milestones for our kids. And let's think for just a second before we get into the details of things. What's the purpose of a milestone? Well, the purpose of a milestone is to mark something important and help us know where we're at, where we've been. You can see in the picture on your screen, there's like an ancient milestone on a footpath. We use mile markers on our highways today. This is a time for you to mark for your student a milestone. They have worked, you have worked through these years of the educational journey to this point, and it's a good time to celebrate. Sometimes when we're going towards that variety pack kind of path after high school, the recognition may not be there, or people don't know how to respond or things like that. I think you guys know what I'm talking about. So it's good for you as the parent to make sure you mark this time and your student can look back and say, oh yeah, I remember when we did that when I finished school or when I graduated. It'll be a good thing. How do we do that as homeschoolers? Well, lots of us do it in different ways. You can join up with a traditional graduation ceremony in your co-ops or tutorials. There's a group in Tennessee, and a lot of the people that have signed in on the chat are Tennessee people. You know, THEA, Tennessee Home Educators Association, has chapters throughout the state, and those chapters almost all have a graduation ceremony. If you're graduating this year, you want to contact them real quick, you can go to thea.org, find your chapter, and see if you can join up. But it doesn't have to be that. And honestly, a good percent of the families that I talk to, the student doesn't really want to do that. The mom does, and the student doesn't. And that's okay, however you choose to mark it. What are some other ways? You can have a party, a big party, a small party with just your immediate family and a few friends. You have a special going out to dinner, a camping trip, another trip, a special gift. It doesn't have to cost a lot, but something that marks this time so that they look back at an accomplishment that they know you're proud of and that they can feel accomplished in. So, and you would be amazed at how much some of our students have accomplished and unique things that our students have accomplished that I wish we all knew about that. I wish I could sit here and just tell you a ton of stories like that, because you would be so proud of your fellow homeschoolers, and you may be the mom or dad or grandma of one of them. In the Bible, we have this same kind of marking of important occasions. And another piece of that is to remind us what God has done. As a homeschool family, whether it's your first student or your last student or your only student, and this will be the end of the process for you, you can look back and see God's provision through those years. There may have been terrible days. There may have been rough days. There may be rough days this morning, but there may be beautiful days. And we want to look back at God's provision and point our kids to God's provision of their days in other types of schooling as well. So in this story of 1 Samuel, you guys probably remember this one where the Israelites, they're bringing the Ark of the Covenant back to themselves that had been taken away. They're repentant towards God for some things they had been doing that they shouldn't have been doing. And they're ready for a battle with the Philistines that's going to be really scary. And they end up winning that battle. But in the process of all that happening, Samuel, as their leader, puts a stone of remembrance down and says, we're going to look back. Here is the Ebenezer. We're going to look back. Hitherto, the Lord has helped us. And it would remind them of what God had done. So when the troubled times come in the future and they walk past that stone, or they walk past with their friend or their child or their grandpa or whoever, they can talk about God's goodness. Mark this for your student and talk about God's goodness. That's a big part of whatever is coming next for our students, whatever it might be. So a conversation that I have with some families who are on the, sometimes we call it in Apple Corps, we call it life choice, or sometimes even college too. Families aren't really expecting to do a community college thing. They're looking at other training or things like that. I kind of wanted to touch on the point today that some parents say to me, how are we here? This is not what we expected. And I want to put some of that weight of that decision process and responsibility back on you and me, because homeschooling has opened your students' eyes to a lot of possibilities. You may have homeschooled since they were little, all the way through. They may have come to you when they were just 2 weeks into their senior year and say, I think I'd like to finish up as a homeschooler. But anybody who has that process, a piece of that homeschooling process in their schooling, probably has a few of these characteristics in their family or in themselves. And so let me give you a few words that are often used to describe homeschool students. Curious, intellectually curious, unique, quirky, I'll probably stop there because those are good ones. We'll stop there. But I don't know about you guys, but in our family, our kids, we have adult children and we have one left in high school. Our kids have this thing where if they meet somebody, they go, and we leave, and then they go, she was homeschooled, or like they know that about each other, right? They sense that about each other. And that is a loving, good thing that we have as homeschoolers, that we, in many ways, are nonconformists. So I don't think we should be surprised that here we sit talking about the variety pack, a multitude of different paths our students might be taking. And I know that happens in public school too, but there is a bent in homeschooling to be okay with being unique. I'm going to read you a couple of quotes that encouraged me. This one is from Diane Keith. She's an author who has written several books on different homeschooling topics. I got this out of an article called "Yes, My Homeschooled Adult Children Are Odd." That's the name of the title, again, in a loving way. By homeschooling, this is her quote, "You have set the example for your kids to defy conventional wisdom and not accept the status quo." So again, this should be expected, that there will be a large number of homeschool students that have amazingly unique and different paths that they're leaning towards. Probably a lot of you have heard of Homeschool Legal Defense Association. If you haven't, look them up. They're super helpful to us as homeschoolers. They go by HSLDA. And Chris Klicka was one of the first attorneys, one of the early attorneys with HSLDA. He passed away at a young age, but I had the opportunity to hear him speak a few times and really respect him and the things that he shared and the encouragements that he gave. And I thought this was a really neat statement that I took out of one of his books. There is a renaissance of young people. I love that word, renaissance, don't you? I love it. There is a renaissance of young people who are creative, self-starters, and lifelong learners coming out of the homeschool movement. So, surprised, not surprised that we have the challenge of helping our kids towards more non-traditional paths going forward. And I think probably it's important to mention as well, maybe for some of us to feel okay about timelines, because we live in a society that has these really rigid timelines of how we do things. Your son or daughter may have a timeline that's, again, not conventional wisdom. They may want to take a gap year. They may want to try one thing and then try another thing, and they're not sure. And while that may limit opportunities if they were on the college kind of track, it doesn't necessarily limit, it may open opportunities on the other track. So if there's somebody here today who says, I have a senior and they don't know what they want to do, and you're freaked out, it's okay. Who said you have to know what you want to do when you graduate from high school? Because realistically, not very many people do, and not very many people stick with what they thought they wanted to do. So it's okay. And you trust God and go forward and follow God today. And then if he tells you to turn tomorrow, then turn tomorrow and follow him in that direction. So don't let those constraints of you have to know what you're going to start doing in September after you graduate freak you out. Be okay with, I'm not saying like if your kid says, I want to sit in the backyard for hours, and just that's all I'm going to do next year. You don't have to be okay with that. I'm not saying, you still are helping guide them and prepare them, but they may want to do something that's not a typical thing that students do right after high school. Although gap years used to be really common, and because of scholarship constraints, sometimes they're not anymore. So it's nice to have that freedom built in a variety path after high school. Because, let's bring it back to homeschooling. We value learning in all styles, not just in a classroom, not just in a book or an online course. We value spending time with master gardener who teaches us wonderful things, or the person that has raised chickens for years and teaches you more so that you can expand your flock, or, all those kind of things. We value art and beauty and so many, many things. And learning is still going to happen in an unconventional way, just like it has probably been happening through all of your years of homeschooling, or even months if you've been homeschooling a short time. So that's a mouthful. Talking. Here's some news I would like to share with you if you haven't already heard this. This is not coming out of homeschool sources. It's coming out of a lot of sources. It's probably talked about in homeschool circles as well. I haven't really seen articles in any of the publications I read regularly, but I'm going to give you resources that you'll recognize as mainstream. College enrollment is declining. So we may not be the ones in the non-traditional anymore. For instance, NPR had noted that there was a 7% decline in recent years. The New York Times has had multiple articles over the past 2 years. When I was pulling up site places and resources and sites, I didn't even comment on them all, but they're talking about this. Just in May of this year, right now, 2022, NBC had a piece that said, college enrollment is plummeting, 3 million nationwide over the past 3 years. And I let me go back and say that more clearly. It's the college applications and enrollment are plummeting. So it's not just that students aren't being accepted, they're not applying either. Now, there may be people here on this chat today, and I'm one of them, that have more than one student. And some of their students choose a college path. That's a fantastic path. I'm not trying to say anything bad about that path, but what I'm talking about today is that here's the other choices, and they're valuable and they're good. And how do we best help and equip our kids for those paths? And that this is purely empirical evidence that I have collected in conversations with homeschool families. Students in this, I get really, really confused about who's what as far as how we call the generations. I think these kids right now are Gen Zers. I might be wrong. If somebody wants to correct me, you can. But they don't necessarily see the greatest value going forward in a college degree as they do in other options. For example, and I didn't get this slide on my slide deck, and I'm so mad. I found this really interesting chart that had people who own small businesses, and it had different generations listed, and it has been a steady rise. So this, this generation, when Chris Clifford says they're self-starters, this generation has a huge percent. This generation that is the youth of today, they're starting their own businesses in droves. And I think that's amazing. We might be at a time of paradigm shift. So if we look back historically at education into adulthood, it hasn't always looked just like it looks right now. And there have been changes for what's going on in the world, for what God is calling people to. And so we're seeing maybe a time of that change again. And I hear that in conversations from parents. So you're not alone if you're in that place. Much of the decline, I might have already said this, but in case I didn't, much of the decline that we have seen that the mainstream sources talk about during COVID, during the past few years, they attribute to COVID and things that happened with lockdowns and schools going online and that kind of stuff. Here's the interesting thing. When I did research and looked back, these articles started way before COVID, maybe a year or even 2 years you were starting to see articles about college applications and enrollments declining. Then the articles that you see post the reopening of schools and things like that comment on the fact they're not seeing a rebound. So there's change in the winds. And what do we do in that spot? We trust God and we value education and beauty and skills and talents that God puts in people so that we can serve each other, serve the kingdom of God, serve those outside of the kingdom of God, and use the talents and the skills he's given us. So then if we're in the variety pack group, how can we best help our children? So it kind of depends where are you at in the process, right? Do you have a 10th grader? Do you have a 9th grader? Do you have somebody that's getting ready to graduate in a couple months? But some overarching ideas that I want to throw out there are, well, when my family, my husband and I first started homeschooling, it was back in the early 90s, and people didn't have a home computer yet. You did everything in books or articles, or you met people and talked to people. And in our community, we found out about this family that was a family that had high school kids. They invited new homeschoolers to their home once a year for a new homeschooling families evening, and they shared resources, catalogs, ideas, ways to connect, a lot of really good information. You know, what's funny is I had a 4-year-old and I was sitting in that meeting. And the thing that I can tell you for sure that I remember from that night is that the husband of that couple shared that one of his duties in his job, and I don't remember what it was, don't know if he owned his own business or if he worked for somebody else, but was that he was a hiring person. He interviewed and hired people a lot. And he said, I want you to know, as you start to prepare your child, whether they're young or getting older already, the things I look for are teachable people, which can be very unique, and people with a strong work ethic. So are we molding those things into our kids? Even if they're a self-starter who's going to start their own business, being teachable is huge. And as humans, that doesn't come natural. We have to remind ourselves. I have to remind myself, and I'm old. It's not like I've learned it, that, hey, there's people that can still teach you stuff. You don't know everything. And that's an important trait and idea to help our kids learn. Do our teenagers always want to hear like, oh, make sure you're teachable? No, they don't. And you might have to be creative. Encourage when you see that trait in them. Discourage when you don't see that trait. And look for opportunities to share that information. That is huge. That is huge, to be teachable. And also the strong work ethic. Encourage your kids when you see that. I'll talk to a mom for my job at HomeLife, and they'll start describing this kid, and I'm sitting there thinking, man, that's a lot that this kid is doing. And maybe it's not academic things, but like a job, and then they care for their grandma's yard, and then they volunteer for this thing at church. And I often comment on, wow, your student really has a good work ethic. Notice that in your child, notice that in other kids, and encourage them about that, because that's a great heart attitude. That's a great service to God. That's something that goes across whatever path you're going into. And so those are two big things to me that I wanted to bring up, teachability and a strong work ethic. But also remember, and I don't want to remind you of this because I'm on my last one and we're getting towards the end too, but your days in this kind of relationship that you have while you homeschool are coming to an end. And whether your student takes all their classes in dual enrollment or in a tutorial or, online, you're still a big process of a part of their process. And that's going to change. I speak that from experience. Adulthood, there, changes and kids grow. And so take these moments to make sure that values that were important to you are reminded to your children towards the end of their high school, to prepare them well to go out into the world. So, not just filling out forms, meeting deadlines. Yeah, those are all really important, but don't diminish the importance of some of these pieces of homeschooling your senior, your junior, or your high school student as they move towards graduation. And sometimes we really get caught up in those other things like filling out forms, meeting a requirement deadline or something like that. But I remind you, and I remind me today, that we need to remember to do these things as well. Another person who's super encouraging, and she'll be on the list of resources that I send out to you, is Dr. Kathy Koch. I don't know if any of you have come across her, but she is a PhD, something to do with education or child development or something like that. I'm not sure, but she works with Kirk Cameron in his Celebrate Kids organization. She has a lot of different books. She is so wise about she has a book title, I think it's called The Seven Intelligences, seeing how different people have been created by God and their giftings and how they would use those giftings. And that can be really helpful as you're sending your student out and encouraging to them. So Kathy Koch, it's spelled C-O-C-H, not like it sounds to me anyway, but look for her if you need encouragement in that area. All right, so here's some real like technical forms and that kind of stuff to keep in mind while you're moving towards graduation, variety pack kind of path on the other side. But there still are forms and details and things you need to keep up with. And what are some of those? And sometimes you look at a list and it's always geared towards the kid that's going to college and like, well, do I got to do this, or should I do this? Or so let me just touch base on a few of those things for you. Testing, college entrance testing, such as ACT, SAT, or the CLT. Those are the three big ones. And then you'll hear of ASVAB. That's the one for kids that are going to enter the military. Does your student have to take one of those tests to graduate from HomeLife? And the answer is no. We do not require any of those testing, even for a student on a college 4 path. It's what do you as the parents decide? We want to support your decision. Sometimes students need it to get into a school, trade school, whatever. Sometimes parents just want it to say, well, I actually had one mom that said, I always told him he had to do that before he graduated, so we're just going to stick with that. That's fine. Sometimes it helps you to feel like, okay, I can see this score and I can feel good about what we've done. But some people are not standardized test people. That's not their philosophy. And so, no, you don't have to. Even if your student might be going to your community college or a trade school, they don't always require it. They a lot of times have their own placement tests. So no, your student does not have to take one of those tests, but HomeLife says you decide what makes sense for you and your student. You say, well, my kid doesn't want to go to college right now, but what if they want to go down the road? You could have them take it, but sometimes as an adult entering a college, if you're older, they may not be looking for that. So, and again, some colleges don't. Some of the places where it really comes, the rubber meets the road with testing are certain colleges and certain scholarships. So most of us are in the variety pack. We're not worrying about that. Then we make that choice ourselves. Yay, I love that place. If you have more questions about that, you need to talk to a counselor, please do. We're happy to talk about it because, again, we are living in a place where if our kid's on a really unique path, there might be things that somebody talking to a bunch of people tells me, but then my little unique thing, I need to know a specific. So don't ever hesitate to reach out to a counselor.